So hello, welcome to this roundtable discussion on reconciliation. My name is Marie-Pierre Poulain and I'm a librarian at the Goethe-Institut in Montreal. Before we begin, we will start with a word from André Lanois, who's our interpreter today. She will explain how to access the translation channel. So I'll be right back.
Bonjour, pour écouter l'interprétation, il suffit de cliquer sur « Interprétation » dans le menu inférieur qui va apparaître dans un instant. Sur une tablette ou un téléphone, il faut sélectionner les 3 points, puis choisir « Interprétation ». To listen to interpretation, simply click on Language Interpretation in the bottom menu of the computer or tap the 3 dots and select Language Interpretation on a phone or tablet. Thank you.
Thank you, André. Now that we're all set, I would like to begin by acknowledging that Montreal, the location of most of our speakers today, is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Canadien.ne.s Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Earlier this year, the Goethe-Institut Canada asked 10 Canadian and 10 German-based authors, "What does reconciliation mean to you?" We received a host of varied responses to this question, each based on the author's personal context. The 20 comics we received for this project are available online at goethe.de/Canada/reconciliation. I will be adding this shortcut in the chat box. We chose the topic of reconciliation because of its relevance to both our countries, namely the 30th anniversary of the reunification of Germany and the ongoing question in Canada of reconciliation with the First Nations, but also because reconciliation can take on as many meanings as there are people. And today, we will delve deeper into what reconciliation means and what it can look like with our 3 speakers. Our moderator today is Catherine Emmanuelle Brunet. She's passionate about literature and documentaries, and she's been cultivating those passions for over 10 years. She works as a researcher, screenwriter, and script editor for feature-length documentaries and documentary series, which have been featured on TV5, Crave, Canal D, Radio-Canada, and UniTV. She is the recipient of a 2020 Gémeaux Prize in the documentary research category, and she also hosts a literary criticism radio show called Les Herbes Folles, as well as roundtables and interviews at the Montreal Comic Arts Festival and the Montreal Book Fair. Catherine, the floor is yours, and I will see you later in the Q&A part.
Many thanks, Marie-Pierre. Can you hear me well? Great, I'm going to start.
Very well.
Great. So can you see me? Because I'm unable to open my video. Well, I'm going to start while we're trying to manage this. So thank you very much, Marie-Pierre. This discussion will last for about an hour, and we're going to open questions at the end, a Q&A. So if you have any questions for our artist, keep in mind, write it down, and we're going to address it at the very end of the conversation. I'm very happy to welcome 3 amazing artists for this panel. First of all, I'm going to present Burcu. Burcu, you are currently in Bordeaux, I think, but you're usually based in Berlin. Hi, Burcu.
Hi.
You are a visual artist, working with illustration, design, and comics as well. You also did some wonderful coloring images for kids and adults during the pandemic months. It was quite nice. And in your work, you address subjects related to equality, feminism, racism, and many other subjects. You co-founded an artist collective called Die Goldene Disco Faust, which means the Golden Disco Feast.
Yes.
It's very interesting. Do you want to say a word about this art collective? Is it still going on?
It's still going on. We're still together and supporting each other, working together. We founded this during our studies in Kassel. So we are all illustrators or photographers. And we've been doing exhibitions together and little publications. And we're just also really good friends.
Yeah, I'm trying to share my screen. Maybe you can see what it is. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so coming back to the conversation. And we also have Julien. Julien, are you there?
Hello, hello.
Hi, Julien. You are based in so-called Quebec City. Your art practice includes illustration and comics. You did illustrate children's novels called L'Abomination du Lac Cristal. You're also very active in comic collectives and self-editing. Your most recent project is called Les 5 plus grands mystères extraterrestres au Québec, which is about aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
Very nice. And is it publishing yet? Is it?
Yeah, the book is available since July this year. It was supposed to be in April, but it was delayed. We wanted to have it at the Montreal Comic Art Festival.
Yeah.
But you know why it was delayed. So now it's available on a Samhain edition.
Very nice. And we also have Wes with us. Hi, Wes.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. You are Carrier with At. It's a nation from British Columbia, a little bit up north, Vancouver. Your art practice is very multidisciplinary, working with bending, illustration, poetry, curation as well, and of course, comics. Your art questions identity and relations between Indigenous nations and the settler states. And one of your most recent projects is called Potlatch Punk, which I found it very interesting because of the inclusion of bodies and clothes as well. And I don't know if you want to say a word about this amazing project.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that project's been ongoing for about 5 years now. And it's pretty slow going because I do all the beading on the jackets on my own and in between other projects. But essentially what it's doing is taking traditional materials and applying them to thrifted and gifted jackets in kind of more of a punk DIY aesthetic. Yeah, and it's a project about identity, but also trying to make it a project that is joyful and exciting for me to work on as well.
Very nice. So we're going to start by, maybe I'm going to ask you to present your own work. I want to hear it in your own words. What was your intention with this particular piece for this particular project about reconciliation? What was your intention? What did you want it to say or represent? Maybe we can start back with the bourgeois, with this amazing pool in the center of your piece. What was your intentions with this piece?
So I started this with a short story that I had already written before. Maybe it was 6 months before this, or not sure. And I wrote this after demonstration against right-winged politics in Germany that I attended. And it was a really hot day. It was super hot. And somehow like walking in this demonstration and feeling this heat reminded me of this global warming situation as well. So, and then I felt really overwhelmed about all the problems that we're trying to fight.
Yeah.
So I wrote this little short story, and then when you asked me to do a comic around reconciliation, I thought I'm more interested in about the stuff that I cannot forgive, or what can I forgive at all if the damage is done already, or who's supposed to forgive me? I don't know.
Yeah, questions that return to us, but return to the collectivity as well, and this relation between the individual and the collective at the same time concerning those questions. And we're going to go back again about those questions, but just before continuing with this round of exploring your individual pieces, maybe Julien, you can present what was your intention with your work. It's I'm going to try to show to people what it is, but it's a church with many texts. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, since the theme was reconciliation, and for the Canada part, it was about mostly our relation with the natives. So I wanted to tell it's something I don't do usually with my comics, because I'm mostly more like fiction, and I like horror story and stuff like that. But I wanted to talk about my youth. I was raised in Côte de Beaupré, which is a eastern part of Quebec City. I would say it's a region, and it was one of the first region where like the French established during like the conquest of North America and all that. So yeah, we have a lot of history about that, like how there was the first farms and Samuel de Champlain, etc. And we, like, our history teachers are really proud to tell us everything about it. But we talk a bit about natives, but not that much. And something that really like tickled me, I would say, was like when I was maybe a teenager. We drove with my parents, and during the summer month of July, there's the Saint Anne birthday. I would say, like it's kind of the holiday of the grandmother of Jesus, something like that.
Yeah.
And we have the basilic in Saint Anne, and there's a lot of pilgrims who are from the Innu nations, and they gather here. There's like hundreds of people, and we didn't know why, and it's just like, yeah, they come here for the summer. They're camping at the municipality camping, and we didn't have even a clue what they were doing here. It's really later that I learned like why these people were coming here, and it was kind of weird to be like, it was in my native, like my home place, seeing all these people and having absolutely no clue what is their story or anything at all. And actually we're kind of sharing this land with them for a long time. So yeah, I wanted to talk about that, like how it was it's mostly about like how much I don't know about like indigenous. So that's kind of like my path to a reconciliation.
Of course, it's a major part of reconciliation, information and knowing and education and making sure every part understand the other parts. It's a conversation. Very interesting. Wes, I'm going to show you your work.
Sure, yeah. So as you mentioned before, I'm Carrier Watat, but I've been living on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, which is a big part of why this comic was so difficult to draw. While this project was happening, I was extremely distracted and busy because I was mostly out on the front lines at the solidarity blockades. And one of the bottom panels down there with the young Indigenous activists with their fists raised up, which you can't totally see in the frame, is one of my friends that got arrested during one of the days that we got raided. And then at the same time, Aisha Hudson had been murdered by the police in Winnipeg. So like this comic kind of came out of a lot of news headlines that were happening at the time. And I think for a lot of Indigenous people, like, we're not unused to being asked about what we think of reconciliation, to the point where I kind of am fatigued by that question.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't have an answer. And for a lot of what I do, I kind of don't really respond to requests like this anymore, to be honest. But I really appreciate being invited to this conversation.
Yes, because it is a quite complex word, and we're not pretending here that it's something that is achieved anywhere in the world. I think it's a complex concept, this reconciliation word. I was wondering if, with comics, something that is very interesting about comics is that we are able to represent things that are sometimes impossible to see, the invisible, because we're able to draw things, we're able to represent things that sometimes were impossible to see with photographies or cinema. The comics can help uncover the invisible. And I was wondering, with a subject like this, with a subject related to reconciliation, do you feel that you were able to put on the table things that were invisible socially?
Speaking, should I continue?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first panel of mine is really an abstracted drawing. Because I think when, like, I've been asked a few times to make work about either residential school or reconciliation, and it really is this abstract feeling for me. Like, it's not something you can tangibly represent in a single panel, especially with so much history behind it. And it's not just like the collective history that is easier to access across Canada. It's also like there's a lot of deep personal histories that come from my own community that I don't have permission to share, but have obviously very intense feelings about. And I think it's hard with a single page, but I really appreciated like the breadth and range and freedom that was given to me, at least, to have a weird abstract drawing in my first panel.
Yeah. Julie, I want to ask you quite the same question. Do you have this feeling that with comics, with this possibility of uncovering things that are invisible, you were able to discuss of something that isn't discussed usually? Like this story of Saint-Anne, do you talk about this socially? Is it something known or not? So with your comics, were you able to?
What I really liked with the opportunity of this comic was when I released it, like on social media and all, a lot of people from my community, like from Saint-Anne, and they talked to me like how much, like everybody, I think we were raised in that, but we all knew it was wrong, but we didn't know why. And now we're adults. And I think what is good now, I think most people try to be like, have more knowledge or more information about the situation of different communities in Canada. And a lot of people were just like, I heard really like terrible stories about, I remember when people were talking about like the camping ground and all that stuff. It was really like, it's not something I'm absolutely not proud about to know like that it is associated with the place where I came from, but I'm glad to at least try to do a little bit of trying to fix things or just acknowledging it. I think it's like the beginning of something else. So yeah, and with the comics, you can just put pictures and show like a place of a different time, of different era, and maybe just give a feel to people, and they can like think what they want about it. So that's what I really like about the media.
Yeah, it's a media that can also represent emotions and feelings with colors, with the graphic composition as well. And emotions is part of reconciliation. And Bourgeois, you actually work with that, the emotion, or we can feel the emotion with the graphic composition, with the color use as well. Was wondering if you had this same feeling of being able to show something that is quite invisible usually, the emotions.
Yeah, of course. Like my text for this comic is like, I try to do it kind of poetic, so that in fact, I mean, it's a cruel feeling to be overwhelmed by all these global problems, and you're kind of alone, but with lots of people on this demonstration, and you feel like doing something, but then really, like, does it change anything? Like, and I think this is something emotional, and I try to put it in poetic words so people feel it. And actually, some people answered me after it was published that they were, oh, I feel the same. But you know, it was also important because there are many people like also here present that that do fight every day, and who don't afford, they can't afford to not fight. So it was important to me to put something in the end that rises hope again, so that, you know, you don't end up with this desperation.
Yes, yes. You were talking about this individual feeling that becomes collective in a way, and it's something that is very specific about reconciliation, is at the same time an individual discourse as well as a collective discourse. And I was wondering, what is your relation between the two in this particular piece? Because you wrote with a singular voice. You wrote with the I, like talking about you, and I was wondering if you still had this relation with the collective, even though you only use a singular voice.
I mean, I think the relation is in my comic, because in the last one of the last pictures, it says, "I'm losing hope, but I'm still with these 240,000 people that walk with me." So I think the connection between me as an individual and the collective is pretty clear, actually.
And Wes, I was wondering, you have a very personal piece as well, but you use the pronoun us instead of I. And I was wondering, who is this us for you in your graphic piece, and why you decided to not write the story with the I?
I actually hadn't noticed that I'd done that. But I think a lot of that comes from what was happening at the time. All of January and February was spending a lot of times on the front lines, and a lot of that was a collective us, particularly, even though it was largely like Indigenous people organizing and present there. The group that I was going with was kind of this ad hoc, impromptu, queer, Indigenous kind of subgroup that would travel together for safety. And it wasn't our intention, it's just we all know each other through the arts and the lit scene. So it felt very much like an us. Like I never went down whenever I'd had my rest. I'd never go back and be alone. There'd always be other queer Indigenous people there. And yeah, it was a really, really intense month. Just like waking up at 3 a.m. sometimes to go for overnight shifts and things like that. And it didn't feel alone, and that's kind of what made it possible to do it all. Yeah.
Yes, and there's this feeling of the collectivity, but acting in your work, because there's this relation with reconciliation that sometimes we say that it's only a word, but it's not an action, and we should act more for reconciliation instead of just speaking. So by doing a comics like this, do you feel that you're acting or you're speaking? Is it an action for you to do this art piece?
I think for me it was an action, and the speaking, such as like panels like this, have been really important, and discussions afterwards have been interesting. I don't think any art I've ever made has gotten as much press as this particular comic, which is interesting. And as resilient as I am towards like having to be in these conversations all the time and having to have my work be all about it, like I think there are interesting moments. Like this particular setup to me was interesting just because it wasn't all Indigenous people on the panel, and like I find those types of panels can be really intense, and it's usually non-Indigenous audiences especially that are watching, and that could be the case in this situation as well, but it's, yeah, like there's something about drawing the comic that like allows a certain amount of distance between it having to be about like my exact personal relationship to reconciliation, because my relationship to it is generally quite negative. I'm just it's kind of that thing where it's like, I'm never going to stop fighting, but I also feel really numb most of the time. And being able to express that a little bit in a comic was, yeah, it was generative. It feels productive, which is nice.
Thank you for your presence, and thank you for being there, even though it can be a lot of energy. And if there's anything in a conversation, you let us know, but thank you for sharing that with us. And this, I think this feeling of energy is quite present when you're working in a political art piece like this one. I don't know, for you, Julien and Bourgeois, what was your experience working with a subject like that? Is it something that is inspiring or limiting and difficult and sometimes painful? What's your relation when you have to produce an art that will be political?
Well, I can start. For me, it was I was really out of my comfort zone, and I had a bit of a like introspection about it. Like, why don't I want to do more political things? Is it because I'm ashamed of something, or I just don't want to be part of something? And or maybe, and I also, like, you just realize once again that is it just because I'm part of a privileged class and I just didn't need to, and it's absolutely more wrong to do nothing then. So I was just juggling between all these ideas, and yeah, and it's kind of, and when I did this story, it's not a big thing, just like talking about how we approach other people and just acknowledging what they are and what they've been through, and just be open about it. And like couple like, was it like last week, the thing about like Joyce Chacun and all, was just like, we talk about, like, I wrote this comic in January. I think it's just worse at the moment than it was. So yeah, so it's kind of hard to talk about reconciliation when I don't think, well, we tried to, but we have to try more. I think that's what I'm feeling at the moment.
Bourgeois, on your side, when we read your story, it's quite, you have discouragement in your work. We can read it, we can feel it. And so for you to write that, was it something painful? Was it something difficult?
You think it's encouraging, yeah?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know, like I think I do political topics, maybe, yeah, often, I can say, maybe, yeah, I do it. But I think I try to approach this, I did the same here, from an emotional point of view. But, like, to be honest, in this topic, I find it really difficult to find a position for myself, like reconciliation. And then I think, like, just before I drew this, there was these killings in Hanau, like a Nazi just killed people from Turkish and more origins. And then you asked me to draw something about, like, wow, that's tough, you know, like, it really took me some time to find something. And then, yeah, like, I still have not a clear position about it, actually. Like, for example, yesterday I watched on Netflix this new movie from David Attenborough. Did you watch it?
Not me, maybe.
No,
maybe
I know
the
what
other.
you're talking about.
Okay. Go ahead.
So, and then, like, it's so painful, you know. He shows how the scientists say how it's going to continue in the next decades if we continue like this, the global warming, and it's like apocalyptic, horrible. And then in the end, he put this this hope, you know, that there are some projects that have been made to make things better, and that they actually work, and that it can be done. And I'm not sure if I don't have this hope always. I'm mostly pessimistic, and I totally agree, Wes. You write in your comic, it's your last sentence. You're saying, as long as there are still front lines, it's not possible to forgive or something. And I really agree, and that's the problem.
It's quite interesting also because we are in it in a way. If we want to, let's say, if we want to take the word reconciliation and say, well, we're in a process of reconciliation, there's this notion of time, which is very difficult to address because you're trying to explain things in the past sometimes, in a present time. You're trying to acknowledge a process that is difficult because we are living it. And as well, you're making an archive of something. You're making an art piece that will probably be there in a couple of years. Maybe it's going to be used in a way to explain what was it during this present time. So I was wondering if you thought about this, if you thought of this notion of time when you're working with an art piece concerning reconciliation.
I didn't think so long term in this specific piece. No, I haven't.
And what about you, Julien? Did you?
Well, I think I would say like my comics is from events that was like maybe that were like 15 years ago, I would say. And I think like I was a lot younger then, but still I'm a lot more aware of the problems today that I was. And I think maybe probably someone from this place was in his 30s at this, like in 2001 or something like that, wouldn't be as much aware as he would be today if he follows a bit the news, or he has a, I say he because I'm talking about like a bit of myself, but like if you want things to change, you, at least I think today there's a bit, like you say, in a path of reconciliation, at least like you can have more information and people want to talk about it and say out loud what is wrong or what should be done. And so yeah, so that I would say, I hope that in 15 years I will be a bit like, yeah, it's kind of starting to look a bit better or something like that, on an optimistic way. So.
And do you have a comment as well, Wes, concerning time, or?
Yeah, I think as an Indigenous artist, like a lot of my work is kind of inherently politicized, and especially if I decide to make work about this or about land defense. And I actually had a UBC professor message me the other day saying like that they had already used the comic in their class, and I think some of the other ones from this project to talk about this already. So it's like a very present conversation. And in terms of the long term, a lot of my work at the gallery that I work at is with a collective for queer, Indigenous, and two-spirited folks. And it was started because the last kind of like big burst of activity that I had noticed in our archive at that gallery was 26 years ago. So moving forward with that work again was kind of like, okay, like I want to make sure that this work can be continuous, but that we also have records to go back to, and there's not these big gaps in between, which is not to say there was no queer Indigenous artists practicing and like working through the gallery at the time, but like there was the Two Spirit Cabaret, which was this really exciting group that was happening kind of at the start of this gallery. And then many of those people moved on to different fields or left art entirely or passed on. So yeah, there's always this present feeling of like, who's going to see this later? Who is this going to be for later?
And you did mention that this work was part of a class, and I was wondering if you thought about this, of being educational with your work. Is it something that was something you plan, or what is your reaction knowing that it's an educational tool right now?
I think for me, like my comics are not my only practice, and it's kind of something I do on the side and something I'm working on and trying to get better at. But my personal style is much more, it is more personal. Like I do zines a lot, and like I like per zines and kind of these more experiential individual kind of like views. I think a good example of kind of like people who I think are thinking more about education are like Cole Paul's comic and Gord Hill. Like both of them do a lot of work in educating, and like a lot of their comics are about education. But for me, it's really hard to like break down stories into logical sequences. So I tend to go more like the poetic side is what I try to do anyways.
Yeah, but it's very interesting, and in a way, this educational aspect of reconciliation, because reconciliation has something related to educating people and trying to have the information spread, and this conversation, this open conversation with many information. And I think, Julien, you addressed this a little bit in your work, knowing that this story isn't really known and people don't have the entire information about the other people, the other nations. And so what's your feeling about having this educational aspect in reconciliation, making research, making sure that people understand correctly?
Yeah, well, as you said before, I think a lot of, well, for myself, I really like to address an issue with like knowing a lot, and just for myself, do I have like a wrong view on something, or is it something I don't understand? Why don't I understand it? So I think, yeah, information and education is really like, for a lot of things, can solve, well, not solve, but helps to make things better, or just understand them more. And yeah, for like a comic like that, for me, it's not like the big thing, but I just, at least I did some research just to be sure what I'm talking about. And and while doing it, I found like articles about it, like on Radio Canada and stuff like that. And I learned a lot of things about it. Like for I found it funny, like in Nous, the month of July, it's called like the month of Saint Anne. So it's really like how history will merge into each other. And well, so it's just like interesting bit, but yeah, I think it's really important to try to share, yeah, good information, I would say, like, so to help the other generation after that.
Yeah, and what about you, Bourjou? Do you sometimes make a lot of research with your work, or is it more something that comes from you, depending? Or
yeah, I mean, I do research for sure, of course, to be sure that everything's correct and that is cool. But like I really don't. I'm not trying to do anything educational, not at all. That's probably because you know, I live in Germany and I have Turkish parents, and I get really like, that's the fight of my life that I didn't choose and have to fight, you know. And I get from so many people that I meet like this, in my opinion, racist ideas or cliches in their minds. And I do this so often. I have to educate them or explain them why this is hurtful and this not and whatever. And I think like I do this in private too much, and I have enough of that.
yeah.
So I think in my comics, I'm really I think I'm trying to kind of make emotions a bit more precise, so that people are maybe more aware of that they have this feeling as well. And I think being aware of stuff is always a good way. So, for example, when someone reads this comic and feels like, oh my God, I feel exactly the same, that's why I didn't go to this demonstration, I felt hopeless. Maybe if this person knows I feel the same, but I still went and then drew this comic, maybe next time he will go. I don't know. I'm not doing it intentionally to educate. It's just, I think, you know, what moves humans, I don't know.
Yes, it spread something. It's inspirational for people as well. That's why art is there in a way. I want to discuss with you guys the notion of symbols, because in reconciliation, there's a lot of symbols. We're having a conversation with others, and sometimes we use symbols, and it's difficult to understand others with those symbols sometimes. So I was wondering, you all use symbols in your comic. Julien, you use a church. Bourgeois, you use a pool. And Wes, you use a barbed wire. And I was wondering if this was if you did that consciously, or if you planned this, and why this use of symbols. Maybe we can start with you, Bourgeois, and I'm going to show this pole that you use. Let me see. Explain us the choice of the pole.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like almost every thing that you're gonna draw in a comic, especially when you combine it with text or other images, it's always gonna be a symbol for something, and the meaning can change, you know. Depends on what you combine it with. And in this case, I mean, I combined it with, I mean, the burning forest is also a symbol, you know, but we just know what it's about. It's global warming. And in this case, it's like a contrast that makes both sides stronger.
Yes. And what does represent the pool for you?
Well, the pool is something man-made, luxury. It's kind of like, in this case, I used it as a contrast to the more warm, the dangerous, or, you know, something like that, as a contrast to that. And I mean, it's not only the pool, it's cleaning the pool, you know, something man-made, trying to keep it clean and tidy. And at the same time, all these things happen.
Yes.
In the world, yeah. That's the symbol, I guess.
Thank you. And what about you, Wes? Your wire, let me show you all.
Yeah.
Here we go.
It's actually, they're like little saplings that kind of look like wire. I'm a big fan of horror films, and I grew up north, where access to the bush, or like the woods and forest, was really easy, and it's one of the things I miss most about being home. The Wet'suwet'en are actually my territorial, like, our neighbors. But yeah, so like growing up, I had a lot of freedom. I wandered around a lot, and like there were always kind of odd things you'd find in the woods that kind of looked sort of like impromptu art installations. And there's always something kind of like mysterious and like kind of horrifying about them, and something almost like forbidden, like you don't want to touch it. And when I'm thinking about difficult feelings, like I often go back and think about, you know, just odd things I'd find in the woods, and yeah, just that foreboding kind of sense about them. But there's also kind of a beauty, like I think usually when you find stuff up north, it's because someone had time, and it's usually, there's like a weird respect to the materials that are around.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a weird drawing. So it feels hard to explain.
No, but it's nice to see, because you use this pink color, which is quite a contrast with the black and white and the other images. Why this pink?
I actually had a good conversation with Cole, one of the other artists, about that. Because a lot of my comics use pink, even when they're kind of about difficult topics. And I like how misleading the color is. And it's a good, like, spot coloring is good for expediency. But it's also like gives a sense of like a pastel kind of soft feeling that's more approachable. And initially I just used pink because it's my favorite color, but like the more I use it, the more I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot of utility to this color and drawing people into like look at it.
And do you add the color afterwards? Because we can see it's in drawing. Do you like scan it and after you put the color? How do you work with colors?
Yeah, I draw everything by hand and then digitally scan and color it because colors scare me. They're easy to mess up and I never want to like have to redraw something. Yeah.
Oh, Bourgeois, I didn't ask you about your choice of color that are very interesting as well. You were talking about the contrasts, but I think there's a lot of contrast with colors as well in your work. Let me return to the share screen.
Yeah, I think I just try to emphasize the two worlds and make them both stronger, to make the danger stronger and to make the human-made cold, but also refreshing water stronger. That's really trying to get as much contrast as possible.
And did you add the rounds afterwards? Is it like a montage or how did you work with that?
Like this one is actually a complete montage. It's like every little thing I drew on different sheets of papers and I put them together digitally. But in the sketches, the bubbles, they were already there. Yeah.
Yes. And what about you, Julien? This church and why the church takes all the place in your work? Why is it the center?
Well, it's mostly because like this kind of the church itself is a symbol, and as well as the bird is saying, like in comics. And when I thought of this story, I just wanted to tell like my point of view of why these Inuit people, they were coming to a Christian holiday in July. That was like my questioning first. Something like we live through it every month of every year since I lived there, but I never like got an answer for that. So it's like me at 31 years old, just searching on the internet to learn that. I found just that I found it so weird. Like it's terrible how much we don't know about like other communities. And yeah, so the basilic, it's just stand there. It's like a big castle on Côte de Beaupré. And I wanted to show also that funny because while we're watching it, I see like the first panel. It's kind of like me and my mother in our minivan, and you see there's a camping just in front of the basilic, and it's just like all these Inuit people having tents and it looks so much fun. I always loved camping, and I wish I had like something like that. Like you go once a month, all your family and friends together. It's like a big pilgrimage, and yeah, so it's kind of, and I play with the colors too, so it's like it's really yellow and warm when it's just like families gathering together and doing some activity. And it was really like also like how they appropriated themselves this symbol of going to the church, which is absolutely not, there's nothing Inuit about it, but now it's there. So that's a bit like, I don't know what is the stand about it, like is it a good thing or not? I absolutely don't know, but now it's there in their culture. They go to Saint-Anne once a year, and that's something they made up, and I think it's kind of I think it's a positive experience for them. So I wish so. So that's why this church is so big in that, because we as a like French descendant, we don't go that much to church, and it's just standing there, and they are closing down, and then there are other communities who are using it, like giving it a second life, I would say. So it was all about my questioning was around this church, so that's why it's so big in the picture.
And I'm gonna ask you, I would say a more delicate question, but I was wondering if you thought about the representation of the indigenous people in your work. Is it something that you did some research? Did you ask yourself some questions about that? Knowing that we are under this major subject of reconciliation, drawing another nation, is this something that needs to be questioning before doing?
Me? Or
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, and as you can see, I wrote like the words drawing of a First Nation. Like I was just wanted to show how like what's still in people's mind and what's it's not about. And after that, I finished with like just 3 women hanging out there, and it's actually the women I saw in the documentary, and they were telling us like their story and why they came each summer, and I found it really cute. So I just wanted to show like, hey guys, stop doing like teepees and feathers, because I used to work also in a tourist center on my in Côte de Beaupré, and we had so much like tourists. They just want to go to Wendake and see like teepees and stuff like that. And yeah, there might be some, but it's not. So yeah, just like inform yourself, please. Just like. Well, and I'm not a professional in that at all. I just know that it's not the reality anymore for some places, and just like stop carrying on the cliches. That's what I want to stop.
Yes, especially when you're working with reconciliation, because it's conversations between different people. This is I would say the base of reconciliation. And I was wondering if when you're working with a subject like that, do you have to consider who you are at first? Like the author behind the art piece. Does it matters in this case? Does it matters a lot for you? For you, 3 of you, but I was wondering, like the question of identity in reconciliation, is this something that you need to think about before doing the art piece?
Well, I can start, but yeah, for my part, yeah, I really thought about it, like how like how do you approach the subject, knowing what like your ancestors did or things like that, because I kind of see myself on the bad side of history in these things. So I just want like, well, me personally, I don't think I did anything right, but still, like I live on a small town which all French, and they probably like just get there on boat. Hey, it's our land now, so that's kind of weird to live with that. So that's absolutely. I thought about it, like how can I talk about these subjects knowing like my history, and trying to make like be well informed, and give the voice to the right persons. That's what I thought about.
And maybe what about you, Wes? I know your entire art work is about identity, but I was wondering if it's something that is sometimes overwhelming, or can you do art without your identity, or is it something that you will always do? And is in this case of reconciliation, do you think we should all think about it before doing art?
Yeah, I think for me, my identity is inescapable. Like I'm a visibly racialized minority just in general, and then being Indigenous is an extremely specific identity to have in Canada, especially right now. And I think for anyone doing this type of work who is non-Indigenous, it is important to think about your position in history and be honest with yourself about that, and know that there's still a lot of work to be done. I think there's a lot of attention given to Indigenous voices right now that's extremely important. But it's also, Bajay, you were talking about being exhausted about having to explain your experience. And I think that's kind of the fatigue that I feel, at least among my peers, is, we're tired. We'd love some other people to maybe respectfully approach this topic, and especially, just if everyone's so interested, be like sincerely, genuinely interested, and like unflinchingly honest about your place in these conversations. So.
And what about you, Bourjou? Does identity matters as well in Germany right now? I know that in Canada the focus is very on that today for an important reason, but what do you feel about identity?
like I'm a little bit tired of talking about identity all the time, because I like people put me in this position all the time, like as if I have nothing else to say, you know. And I mean, that's fine. Of course, about some stuff I have maybe more to say or know better than other people. But yeah, anyway, so in general, I think that like that's why research is so important. Like if I try to draw something about the world that I don't know, I just have to do my research to not fall into the cliches and into stereotypes. I think that's the responsibility that I feel doing images that other people look at. That's my responsibility. But I mean, of course, I feel most comfortable in drawing what I know. There, I don't have to do that much research, maybe.
And do you think that we can avoid the subject of identity when we're working with reconciliation? Because you said that you were a little tired of having questions about identity, and I completely understand that. But I was wondering is it possible to address reconciliation without identity?
I mean, reconciliation is such a big topic. You know, you can, for example, my friend and colleague also from the Goldene Disco Faust, Cherie Domingo, also made a comic for reconciliation for you. And she chose a very personal topic about about fights within families and how to deal with that. So, it can be anything.
You're right. It can be a reconciliation with your own family. That's right. I think because of the spectrum of the subject, I would say in the position we decided to put this subject, which is a book fair between Canada and Germany, I think it's difficult to avoid those kind of questions because it's reconciliation in the context of Canada, so-called Canada, and the context of Germany. But you're right, and some people did a very personal project with reconciliation and family.
And maybe,
right.
I mean, maybe how it works, how reconciliation works is maybe not so different. I'm not sure about this. Maybe if you are able to if you have a fight with a family member and you manage to understand his position, or just understand that, that's already the kind of teaching yourself to have this respect, to try to understand each other. Maybe it's not so different actually.
Yeah, right. And sometimes in reconciliation with family, there's this notion of you're stuck with those people in a way. So you have to try at least to come with a reconciliation. Yeah. It's been already an hour. I think we can open the floor if some people who are listening to us have some questions. I'm gonna open the Q&A. Hello, everyone who are listening to us. Do you have any questions for Bourjou, Julien, or West, or the three of them? Gonna wait a little. So while we're waiting, in case we have a question, you were talking, Bourjou, about the family, like reconciliation in a, I would say, a little focused, like a more little scale, and not like a political country scale. Julien, Wes, and maybe you again, Bourjou, do you have other ideas that pop up your mind about reconciliation while you were looking at other projects of other artists, what they did, and did it inspire you to reconsider your own interpretation of reconciliation?
Well, not reconsider, but when I was given like the theme of the comic and all that, and I was really thinking, this is the first thing that popped to my mind was really like the situation with like natives on Côte de Beaupré and all that. But when I saw like also like one of it, she's a comic artist from Montreal, Sophie Bédard. She did something about really like personal about like reconciliation more bit after a romantic breakup or something like that, and I was really like, oh, that's I was really like, I never think about things like that, and it was fun to see all the different takes of people. So I thought I was really going quite literal, and people were just like doing some introspective stuff. So I really like how reconciliation can mean a lot of things for a lot of different people.
Yeah.
I think I had kind of a similar situation. I see the word reconciliation, and because it's just been so hammered into Indigenous academics and art, like I just assume it immediately means specifically like the state project of reconciliation. Like I don't really think about the individual parts, but seeing the ones with the family, especially, like I'm Indigenous, but my dad is white, and like they're so they are so frustrating sometimes to be around. Just it's almost like they forget that I'm Indigenous sometimes, and it's a big topic in my family to have to navigate these difficult conversations. And it's not easy because for them, it's like my lived reality, especially when we're talking about police brutality right now. And I think they have a lot of kind of like moralistic approaches. There's a big problem with hitchhiking up in my community, and we were watching a documentary about the Highway of Tears one night, and my grandma said like, oh, those girls, they should behave better, they should stop hitchhiking and stop drinking. And it's like, there's no buses, there's no way to get from point A to point B. And if you're Indigenous, you're just especially vulnerable. But that's not like something I can really discuss with my grandma in a meaningful way where it's going to change her mind. I just have to be like, hey, grandma, like sometimes people get stuck in places, and that has to be my contribution. And going further than that is just going to be harmful.
We have a comment or a question about from Carolina. Carolina is saying, my Polish grandmother survived the Second World War. When I talked about that with her, she always said, you can forgive, but you can never forget. I would like to know what the artists think about that sentence. And of course, thank you very much for that interview, and thanks to the artists for their amazing work. So yeah, I'm going to repeat the question. You can forgive, but you can never forget. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's, well, I can't speak for it's like so horrible, but it's just like, yeah, I think reconciliations, like we said before, it's a lot about acknowledgement and knowing what has been done, and like kind of committing or wanting to commit to the future. So of course you can forget, but at least there's some hope of forgiving. Well, that's what I think about it on my side. So
I think forgiveness is, it's really difficult for a lot of Indigenous people. I know for me it is, and I feel like it's something I could agonize over a lot more and question my own altruism and whether or not I'm being generous enough or kind enough. But it's not as productive for me to agonize over that. And if that means I also don't forgive things, that's okay. I think there's so much trauma within my community of people wronging each other because of addictions or alcoholism. There's a lot of abusive relationships, and unfortunately, like a lot of, it's just so interconnected that whether you forgive or not, you're still going to be dealing with these people who are your family, who on some level you still love. So I kind of usually take forgiveness and just put it aside and add what they've done wrong into my compendium of what I know about them and just try to operate from there and try to navigate it from not having to be in that situation again. And then like in the larger like state scale of things, like I think the question a lot of us have is like, well, who does this forgiveness serve? If like Indigenous people are going to forgive Canada, what do we get out of that? And it's just a feel-good feeling. Like I feel like a lot of the Truth and Reconciliation Act was about this show. And what did Indigenous people tangibly get out of that? Well, we didn't get better resources on our reserves. We don't have sovereignty. We don't have, there's a lot of tangible legal document things that we just don't have. So the forgiveness in that place, it's like, it doesn't mean a lot to me, but that's me as a young person. Whereas I think many residential school survivors, they do find solace in these apologies, these public apologies. So the generational act of forgiveness can also be another like complicated element of the conversation, I think.
Interesting. I feel that there's a lot of crying from our Prime Minister and not a lot of action in a way. Bonjour, do you want to respond to the question or you're free?
Yeah,
if you have something to say, go ahead.
Carolina is also my friend and colleague, and I'm very happy that she shared this with us now. I like the sentence, you can forgive, but you can never forget. I'm not sure. I think that there are some things that you cannot forgive and you cannot forget. Like it's bad, it's cruel, it's wrong, that's it. And maybe when I'm a grandmother, I will also be able to say, you can forgive, but you can never, like, I'm not sure. I think this is a very complex sentence because she says you can forgive, which is for me like the biggest thing. Someone, I mean, she survived the Second World War. Wow. If she says that, that's such a strong sentence. But then this you can never forget. Yeah, I don't know. It's a complex sentence. I don't know. And I think it's very strong because it comes from her Polish grandmother that survived the war.
It is because of the context, you're right. And I feel that, I don't know about you, but apologies and forgiveness and feelings and emotions is political as well. And sometimes we forget about that and we interpret somebody saying I'm sorry like something only emotional, but there's a political act as well.
That, and also, I mean, it's also the same, for example, I don't know, when a child apologizes to you for doing something, sorry, I broke the, I broke the plate or whatever, that means like you will try to not do that anymore. I mean, that's what apology means, that you will try not to do that, to continue that failure that you did. And if that's not there, the apology is not really, it's not real. For example, I talked to Carolina about this actually, because she's also working on a comic project right now in Berlin. And they're working in the, I think it's called Pilecki Institute. It's a Polish archive, and they were looking in the old papers and stuff, and she had contacts to her family and talked about their past. And there I learned that many incidents from the Second World War are still being held back, so it doesn't get public or it's not completely on the table. So what does, how can you forgive, it has no meaning.
Very interesting. The Q&A is still open. Guys, if you have any questions for our artists, go ahead. We have a couple of minutes before the end of this conversation. It's interesting to see that there is not a lot of apologies in the comics that were proposed. I don't know if it's because it's not part of reconciliation, or it's because it's too complex to include forgiveness, but there is not a lot of artists that decided to express this forgiveness part. This project. Do you feel that for yourself, did you thought about it, about the forgiveness part of reconciliation while you were creating your work, or not at all?
That's a good question. Good. Yeah, well, like, I don't know, I felt like reconciliation was more about like acknowledgement and trying to do things better, but of course there's a part of apology in it probably, but for me, I think like apology is not enough, so that's like you have to pursue with reconciliation or actions, or like you were talking about, like it could be like legislation or things like that. So it's not just sorry we did bad, we're all good now. So I don't think that's enough for like almost anything actually. So yeah, so that's a good point. I never thought about like the apology or the excuse of it. So probably like one step in the process, but I don't think apology is a finality.
But sometimes art can also be like a discussion, an open discussion. Yeah. It doesn't have to be an answer of something. We can maybe finish by a general question about art, because this project was about art, reconciliation and art. And I was wondering, do you feel that art has a major place in any conversation that concerns reconciliation? That there has to be art in order to achieve something? What is your feeling about art and reconciliation?
I think I was asked an interesting question a while ago as a part of a survey that was asking about how Indigenous artists could be best served. And the question was just, do you think arts and culture are separate? Because that's often how they're divided, at least in this city, and I think in most cities in Canada. And for me, I don't see a distinction between arts and culture. And I think for me, a lot of this comes from growing up in a potlatch culture where art was a part of our everyday life, in the sense of like, if you're going to a potlatch, there are button blankets, there are masks, there's a lot of like gifts that are made, and they're artistic, but they also have really significant meanings behind them, either in like what they literally represent or in the action of sharing them. So yeah, for me, like, I think art needs to have an important part in reconciliation, at least in terms of like Canada is like especially important, but even in between our interpersonal acts of forgiveness or non-forgiveness, like art can be such a perfect medium to like translate what you're feeling and what you're thinking to someone in a way that goes beyond having a conversation. Because like sometimes you end up in conversations with people where you both know you're just like constantly circling something and not really resolving it, but like being able to put that energy towards something external outside of you is a really cathartic and transformative moment.
Do you want to add something, Bourchou or Julien, about art and reconciliation?
I think that art plays a big role because it touches people or awakens feelings or makes people understand something that they haven't even looked at before, maybe. And I think this connection is important for any discussion, I think.
Yeah, like, yeah, I just want to add, like, I think now we live in an era where we consume a lot of art, maybe by not always knowing it, but I just think about like Instagram and social media where you just, yeah, there's a situation and you see like drawings, artists get together, gives a lot of fuel to a movement, I think. So that, yeah, it is art. So as Burju saying, it's just touching people and a good synthesis of like what we want to say.
Thank you all. You were very generous in your answers, and yes, art is so important. So please continue. Marie-Pierre, I'm gonna give you the space to end this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Catherine, for moderating. Thank you to Julien, Wes, and Burju for your enriching conversation and for the thoughts you shared with us today. And again, I'd like to apologize about the technical issues with the cameras at the beginning of the panel. I'm glad that was resolved quickly enough. On behalf of the Goethe-Institut Montreal, thank you to all for joining us today. Thank you to André Lanois for the simultaneous translation. Thanks again to our moderator and panelists on this talk. And if you would like, you can follow them on social media to keep up with their works. I've added their information in the chat. And until next time, we'd like to wish you a very pleasant day. So take care. Thank you so much.